What's up, cooks? Welcome to the Card Kitchen. I am the Card Chef, and today we are asking ourselves whether or not Lapras EX is any good. So is Lapras EX any good? I think the unfortunate answer to that is just simply no. It's not that great of a card. It's a really fun and interesting card that you could try and build around and have some very interesting cooks. But it's just not that great when you compare it to something like Articuno EX. When you compare these two cards together, they have a lot of similarities. They are both water Pokemon that give your opponent 2 prizes. They both have 140 HP. They both have a 3 energy attack that does 8 damage, except when you really think about it, I think there's a clear-cut winner, and that's clearly Articuno EX. They both have a floor of 80 damage for that one attack, whereas Articuno EX also does damage to the opponent's benched Pokemon, meaning it has a ceiling of 110, whereas Lapras has a ceiling of 80 damage plus 20 healing itself, which is like a total of 100 damage counters across the board. 20 healing on yourself, 80 to your opponent. And then also Articuno EX has a second attack for 2 energy and 40 damage, which means across 2 turns you're doing a total of a ceiling of 150 damage, whereas in that same amount of time for Lapras you're only doing 80 damage and maybe healing from yourself, because if you don't have any damage on yourself you're actually not healing at all. And then when you look at the retreat cost, it's very clear who's better here. I mean, you have 2 for Articuno and 3 for Lapras. In most decks, you want to be playing something like an X-Speed. You almost feel like you can't play it in Lapras EX. And because its retreat cost is 3, it's super bad into Sabrina and decks that play Pidgeot. And sometimes it actually feels like the worst thing about the card, because if you have a Lapras in the back and nothing else, and it gets pulled into the front and has no energy, and you've wasted all those energy on your other Lapras, it's basically like you've given your opponent 2 free prize cards. Now, when it comes to the decks that you play with Lapras, there's clearly only 3 that I've seen so far and that I've tested myself, and that's Starmie EX, a Dragonite build, and the Butterfree build. And I think when you look at all 3 of these decks, I think Starmie is probably the best one. I think Dragonite you just shouldn't be playing at all, and the Butterfree is by far the funnest version here. It's very fun, it's a very interesting cook, and if you want to have fun playing this card, Lapras EX that is, you should play the Butterfree build. Now when it comes to the Starmie EX build, as I mentioned, I feel like this is the best version if you want to actually try and get wins and be successful with it. The unfortunate thing about this deck is it might be the best Lapras EX deck, but it's not the best Starmie EX deck, and so therefore it's almost like not really worth playing. I mean, if you look at the deck, it's basically the Articuno Starmie build, except you're replacing Articuno with Lapras EX. Both these cards are trying to do something different, but at the end of the day, it's kind of the same build. In this one, I added 2 potions and removed the X speeds. The X speeds are a lot better in the Articuno build, whereas here, when you get stuck with the Lapras in the forefront, in the active spot, it's kind of hard to get him out, and you would basically have to use 2 X speeds sometimes in order to get him out. And again, this deck feels very reliant on Misty hitting your Lapras, and if it doesn't, it feels like a dud. Whereas in the Articuno build, you don't need Misty for Starmie anyways, but for Articuno, you at least you can build it up as slowly as you build up Lapras, except for the fact that you can start attacking in a lot earlier with the Articuno. So I just don't think, even though this is the best Lapras EX deck overall to try and get wins, I don't think it's the best Starmie deck, and that's an issue because this deck is so reliant on energies, and if you miss a Misty and you're not playing X speeds, you want to be able to have that free retreat on Starmie so that if you did build up a Lapras in the front and they try to Sabrina it out for whatever reason, they basically can't, because you have 4 options to get in Starmie, which is the 2 regular Starmie and the 2 Starmie EX. Once those come out, you can freely retreat and not waste any energies, because having to put 3 on Lapras and then 2 on Starmie can sometimes be really hard to do, and wasting them on retreats on a card that other than Starmie can sometimes hurt. The Dragonite Lapras build, I think this is a cook that people basically just want it to work, but I don't think it does. People are kind of using Lapras EX as that tank to build up the Dragonite, but the issue is if you're using it as just a tank, it's basically like giving your opponent 2 free prizes, which you don't want to do, because either you put it in the front and you waste a ton of energies on it, and then it dies by the time it has all those energies on it anyways, because you have to think of it this way. It sits there as a tank, you start putting energies on it, by the time you get those energies up and it starts to heal itself, it's not healing enough to the point where on the next turn they're probably going to knock you out anyways, which means again it's very reliant on Misty hidden, and when it doesn't, it really sucks. So it's either you manually place them if you missed it, and then it dies by the time it even has any type of value out of it. Now in this deck we are playing 2 Misty and we are playing the X speeds, but it's simply due to the fact that you want to get that Dratini out of the front and bring the Lapras in. You can try the build. I don't think it's the best Dragonite build either, kind of like in the Starmie build. If it's not the best build of Dragonite, you probably shouldn't be building this deck at all. Now this deck, the Butterfree Lapras deck, is really cool. I don't think it's as strong as the Starmie, unfortunately, and if Starmie EX, Lapras isn't the best Starmie deck, and this isn't the best Lapras deck, then why should you be playing it? I think this is the funnest deck. I think it's the most interesting and cool build. The idea is that you get energies on your Lapras, and at least now, unlike the other decks, when it's taken so much damage before you finally put all the energies on it, it actually has a chance of healing back up, because you can heal 20 with itself, you can heal 20 with a potion, maybe 40 with 2 potions, and anywhere between 20 to 40 depending on how many Butterfree you actually have on the field, which means with just the Butterfrees, if you have 2 of them, you're healing 60 damage a turn, because 20 from itself, 20 from Butterfree, 20 from the other Butterfree, and then those one-off turns where you're playing the potions could be up to 100 damage in 1 turn that you're healing. This is probably the best function of a Lapras EX, but I still don't think you'll get as many wins as you would the Starmie EX, because at least Starmie EX, you're hitting 90 a turn. This one you're only doing 80, but for 3 instead of 2. But this deck is super fun, and I think you should play it if you want to have fun playing this card. The one thing I don't like about this deck, but I do feel like it's necessary and kind of just builds around the entire strategy and the synergy of the deck, and that's playing the Ericas. I think any deck where it's you're playing 2 supporter cards that are specific to a specific type is really hard to do. For instance, Misty for Lapras doesn't work with Butterfree, and Erica for Butterfree that doesn't work with Lapras. But again, if you have that that Caterpie in the front and then evolve it up, you can start start using Ericas on your grass type, whereas you can start using Misties on the Lapras. The cool thing about this deck as well is I'm also not playing XPs. I'm not saying that's the right thing to do. I have seen some cooks that are playing it. However, I think you're okay with the Caterpie in the front, whereas in the Dratini deck, you need to get Dratini out. In this one, you're okay with Caterpie being the first Pokemon there, or Lapras being the first Pokemon there. With Caterpie being there, you can start attacking and thinning your deck out. as well as getting those specific evolutions you need. And with Lapras in the front, of course, you just start manually loading it up, and then by the time it's done, hopefully you have your Caterpie, your Butterfree lines, your potions in your hand, and you start healing up Lapras to get that strategy going. Yeah, I think you should play this deck above the other two if you want to have some fun. And honestly, this might even be the best version of the deck. I keep saying the Starmie deck, but that's only because the Starmie deck, you at least have two Pokemon that can attack, and one that you can build up quickly, start attacking with, and then bring Lapras into the end and maybe sweep with Lapras, or bring Lapras into the front, Misty it, and then bring Starmie EX out at the end to sweep with. Let's talk a bit about some of the decks you might come into and how well they are into at least the meta decks. And in this case, it's, you know, Pikachu, Mewtwo, Charizard, Starmie, and Venusaur. And I don't think this does great into almost any of them, except for the exception of maybe Venusaur. When it comes to Pikachu, it's pretty simple. It hits for weakness against Lapras, which is really hard to deal with in general. Considering Pikachu's probably the best deck, if not the best deck in the game right now. It's the most aggressive and the fastest attacking deck in the game, and it hits for weakness. It just does really, really bad into Pikachu, and that's kind of why I still think the Starmie EX version of the Lapras deck is probably the best, because it's the only one that has a chance to actually out-aggro with a good draw and a poor draw on your opponent's side of the board. When it comes to the Mewtwo matchup, again, I think you're solely relying on the Starmie build and Starmie trying to out-aggro the opponent's side of the board in order to take it out before it gets built up with Gardevoir or the energy on the Mewtwo. Once Mewtwo is built up, its attack is 150, it's taken out Lapras, whether Lapras tries to heal itself or not. It doesn't even have the chance to do it, no matter how many Butterfrees, no matter how many potions you have. It just straight up takes it out in one shot, and can also start early damage with his original attack, the Psychic Sphere, for 2 energy and 50 damage. It's just not great into Mewtwo, unfortunately. As for the Charizard build, I mean, listen, you're supposed to do good into it. Again, this is why the Starmie EX deck is probably the best version. You need to start attacking right away in order to stop Charizard decks from doing anything. The issue with this is the same issue with Mewtwo EX, is if their Charizard gets built up, it one-shots your Lapras and doesn't even have a chance to heal itself. No matter how many turns before it was able to do it with the Butterfrees or the potions or whatever it may be. Very bad matchup. When the Caterpie build, Charmander is strong against the Butterfree line. In fact, one attack from a single energy attack from Charmander just takes out your Caterpie in one shot. Again, another bad matchup, unfortunately. The Starmie matchup, again, I still think the Starmie EX Articuno EX deck is just better. It can out-aggro your deck because it can be aggressive with both Starmie and Articuno and do a lot more damage. Cool thing is, at least in the Butterfree deck, every time Articuno EX attacks your bench, if you have a Butterfree online, all that attack gets healed. And so you got to get really lucky with Misties against a Starmie EX Articuno EX deck. For the Venusaur matchup, it's a little tough, to be honest. I think this is probably your best matchup. I think the issue is Venusaur probably does the whole healing thing a lot better than the Lapras does. Lapras does get to play Butterfrees, which is kind of interesting. And a lot of these games against Venusaur are going to be very long, very drawn out. You might even get to ties. I've seen some people online get into ties. But the issue is, it's hard to take out an Executor EX with this deck. and it's hard to take out a Venusaur as well. And the Venusaur would hit for 100, bringing your Lapras down to 40. You would heal maybe 60. You would bring it back up to 100, which means the Venusaur is going to take it out next turn anyways. So it's probably not really a good matchup, and Venusaur does the whole healing thing better anyways. So again, just another bad matchup against the top 5 meta decks out there right now. As for some other matchups, this deck really only does very good against decks that do minimal damage at the beginning of the game. Even cards like Farfetch, Mankey, Marowak, those types of attack damage, the ceiling of 40 and below, this deck does really good against. It basically makes the opponent feel like all those attacks that they've done early on in the game mean absolutely nothing, because Lapras can at least withstand, you know, like 3 Farfetch attacks, and then finally get those manual energies on him, and then just start healing up with himself, his Butterfree, the potions, and all that kind of stuff. So it does really well against those kind of decks. But the one deck that does that similar kind of style of early aggression for budget decks is Blaine, and you would think that this deck does really good against it, but it kind of doesn't. The Starmie EX deck obviously does, because you can aggro with your Starmie. However, if you get stuck with a Lapras in the front, with Blaine's and Giovanni's, those Blaine decks, even though they're weak to water, will actually take your Lapras out before it even has any chance to do anything. So again, a bad matchup into a type of deck that you're supposed to be strong against, and fire is really an issue. And another just point I realized while I was making this video is Arcanine EX is without a doubt the worst EX in the game. It's a fire type Pokemon that's weak to Lapras. It does damage to itself, and with one attack from Lapras, it still doesn't take it out. So basically, our Arcanine attacks your Lapras for 120 and does 20 damage to itself. Then you do 100 damage to them and don't take them out, which means you've done a total of 120 damage, and then he gets to attack again and still doesn't knock himself out. When you can't even do good against the worst card in the game, I feel like that's kind of an issue for the card, and it's just an important point I think that needs to be noted. So final thoughts on the deck, or the card and its decks. Again, just not the best card. It's a really fun card to build, specifically with the Butterfree build. I think it's a little too reliant on Misty, whereas other water decks are not necessarily reliant on Misty. I think its best versions of its deck are not the best version of the actual deck itself. In other words, like I said, the best version of the Lapras EX deck is the Starmie build, but it's not the best Starmie EX build. The Dragonite build is without a doubt not the best Dragonite build, and then the Butterfree build is the funnest, and some people might argue it's actually the best build. It's most certainly the funnest build, and you get to do a lot of stuff in the deck. And I would suggest, if you're going to play this card, play the Butterfree build. It's just a lot of fun. It's interesting. There's no other deck like it. Nobody's playing Butterfree and Venusaur really, except for experimentation, and no one's really playing it in something like a Kabutops, which also does a similar effect to Lapras in healing itself. And so, should you play the card competitively? Absolutely not. Should you play it for fun? Absolutely. But you're really only going to have fun with it in one deck, whereas the other decks you might not have as much fun. So that's the video. That's my opinion. Let me know if you agree or disagree in the comments below. And catch you next time, and keep cooking.